there's a very interesting thing about that I've discovered, that you cast your director as carefully as you cast the star. I just read my scripts out loud and hope to goodness I could remember the lines and speak up, that's all. It's very interesting and a great deal of fun. As a matter of fact, working in pictures has taught me so much about other industries.
She was not just a Hollywood star. She was a fighter, a survivor, and one of the most controversial women ever to walk into a studio lot. To the world, Joan Crawford was elegance and power. But behind the cameras, she was something else entirely. Rivals feared her, rumors surrounded her, and her own daughter exposed secrets that shocked millions. Even decades later, people are still asking the same question. Was Joan Crawford a misunderstood icon or the monster Mommie Dearest described? Joan Crawford's story did not begin in Hollywood mansions or elegant gowns. It began in poverty, with a girl named Lucille Fay LeSueur, born in 1904 in Texas. Her father abandoned the family when she was still a child, leaving her mother to struggle to provide. Lucille's childhood was filled with instability, moving from place to place, and even enduring years at a Catholic boarding school where strict discipline left lasting marks on her. By the time she was a teenager, she had already decided one thing: she would never be poor or powerless again. That drive to escape her past became the foundation of everything Joan Crawford would do for the rest of her life. Like many ambitious young women of the 1920s, Lucille turned to dance as her ticket out. She worked menial jobs to survive, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, and even performing in chorus lines just to be near the stage. Eventually, she caught the attention of talent scouts who saw something in her: raw charisma, a hunger that could not be taught, and eyes that demanded attention. MGM signed her in the mid-1920s, but there was a problem. The name Lucille Fay LeSueur did not exactly scream movie star. Studio executives claimed it sounded awkward and forgettable, even calling it too harsh for Hollywood. So they held a contest in a movie magazine to rename her, and the winning entry gave birth to the name the world would remember: Joan Crawford. With her new name, Joan threw herself into becoming a star. She did not just rely on MGM's publicity machine. She actively reinvented herself. She changed her look, perfected her mannerisms, and studied the women who already ruled the silver screen. But unlike many starlets who were content to let the studio guide their careers, Joan took control of hers from the start. She fought for better roles, pushed her way into social circles, and made sure she was seen at every major party. When MGM marketed her as the girl next door, Joan leaned into it but quickly reshaped it into something sharper: the ambitious, independent woman who would not let anything stand in her way. By the late 1920s, she was one of MGM's fastest rising stars, appearing in silent films like Sally, Irene, and Mary and Our Dancing Daughters. Her performances were not always refined, but audiences loved her energy. More importantly, women saw themselves in her, a working-class girl who had clawed her way to the top. At the dawn of the talkie era, when many silent stars faded, Joan adapted seamlessly. Her voice, polished through endless rehearsals, carried her into the new age of Hollywood, proving she was not just a pretty face. But this reinvention came with a cost. Those who knew Joan during this period often described her as restless, calculating, and obsessed with control. She did not want to just be another actress in the MGM lineup. She wanted to be the actress, the one who defined the studio's future, and she was not afraid to make enemies in the process. Even in these early years, whispers spread about her ambition, her affairs with influential men, and her determination to push aside any rival who got in her way. From a little girl abandoned by her father to a young woman who renamed herself and clawed into Hollywood, Joan Crawford had transformed into a star by sheer force of will. But the higher she climbed, the more ruthless she had to become. Because in Hollywood, one thing was certain: if you were not willing to fight for your place, someone else was waiting to take it from you. By the 1930s, Joan Crawford was no longer just another MGM contract player. She was a star in every sense of the word, but she knew better than anyone that stardom in Hollywood was fragile. In an industry built on image, she understood that survival meant not only talent, but also ambition. And Joan had both in excess. She worked harder than anyone else on set, rehearsing endlessly, studying her roles until she knew every detail, and refusing to be outshined. But with that determination came whispers. Joan was not just hard-working, she was ruthless. She knew the right people to charm, the right executives to please, and the right rivals to step over when it suited her. One of the biggest obstacles in her rise was her constant rivalry with Norma Shearer, MGM's First Lady and the wife of studio executive Irving Thalberg. Norma had the benefit of power and protection, but Joan had something else: hunger. While Norma played elegant society women, Joan represented something new: the working-class girl who demanded her place in high society. Their competition for roles became notorious, with Joan accusing MGM of holding her back to protect Norma's status. Whether it was true or not, the perception was clear: Joan was not going to accept second place. Her personal life fueled the rumors even more. Joan was said to have cultivated friendships with influential men in the industry, from producers to directors, and gossip spread that she used these connections to secure her position. Some claimed she manipulated studio politics to edge out rivals, while others insisted her relationships were genuine. In Hollywood, the truth often blurred with speculation, and Joan was content to let people wonder. What mattered most was that she stayed at the center of attention. Throughout the 1930s, Joan starred in a series of films that captured the image she carefully crafted: independent, stylish, and unstoppable. Movies like Grand Hotel, Sadie McKee, and Dancing Lady solidified her as a cultural symbol. She was not just playing glamorous women, she was defining what glamour looked like. Off-screen, she maintained that same perfection. Always impeccably dressed, always in control, Joan presented herself as the ideal modern woman, one who could reinvent herself endlessly. But beneath that glossy surface, Joan was aware of the industry's brutal truth: Hollywood loved you until it did not. Actresses were discarded the moment their looks faded or audiences moved on to the next face. Joan refused to let that happen to her. She reinvented her image time and again, moving from flapper roles in the silent era to sophisticated melodramas in the 1930s and beyond. Each time Hollywood threatened to leave her behind, Joan transformed and forced the spotlight back onto herself. Her determination earned her admiration, but also resentment. Directors called her demanding. Co-stars described her as competitive to the point of hostility. But for Joan, there was no other way. She had clawed her way from nothing into Hollywood royalty, and she was not about to let anyone take it from her. The studio system was a game, and Joan Crawford was determined to win. By the end of the decade, Joan was one of the most bankable stars in the industry. But her hunger for control had also made her enemies. She was no longer just competing for roles. She was competing for dominance in a town where loyalty shifted overnight. And as Joan was about to discover, fighting her way to the top was only half the battle. The other half was surviving the people who wanted to bring her down. Hollywood has always thrived on rivalries, but few were as explosive as the ones surrounding Joan Crawford. She was not content to share the spotlight, and her ambition clashed with anyone who dared to stand in her way. On screen, she played elegant women with icy stares and sharp lines, but off-screen, those battles were far more real. Her most infamous feud was with Bette Davis, a clash so intense it became part of Hollywood legend. The two first crossed paths in the 1930s, but their animosity exploded in the 1960s when they were cast together in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. The film was a psychological horror, but the real drama played out behind the scenes. Joan and Bette traded insults, undermined each other during filming, and fought for dominance on set. Rumors swirled that Joan deliberately sabotaged Bette's scenes, and Bette never forgave her. Their feud was so bitter that decades later, people still argue about which actress truly came out on top. But Bette Davis was not Joan's only rival. Later, as younger actresses like Marilyn Monroe and Ava Gardner rose in popularity, Joan felt the sting of being replaced. Stories circulated that she dismissed them publicly, calling them unprofessional or lacking class. But behind those comments was something deeper: fear of losing relevance in an industry obsessed with youth. Joan also developed a reputation for being difficult on set. Directors described her as demanding, always wanting control, while co-stars often resented her for stealing the spotlight. Yet her professionalism could not be denied. She arrived prepared, knew her lines, and delivered performances that kept audiences captivated. For Joan, the hostility was worth it. If someone had to dislike her for her to stay on top, so be it. Still, the constant rivalries took their toll. Hollywood thrives on gossip, and Joan's name was rarely absent from the headlines. Some stories painted her as a cunning manipulator who used charm and connections to get what she wanted. Others described her as fiercely independent, a woman refusing to play by rules set by men. Both versions could be true, and Joan seemed comfortable letting the mystery fuel her legend. What made Joan especially unique was how she leaned into these rivalries. Where other stars might try to smooth things over, Joan turned them into part of her brand. The more people talked about her feuds, the more her name stayed alive in the industry. But those battles did not just stay in Hollywood's social circles or studio lots. Eventually, Joan's most shocking and destructive conflicts would be found much closer to home, within her own family. For years, Joan Crawford sold the world the image of a devoted mother. She posed for magazine spreads with her children, smiling in matching outfits, presenting herself as the perfect combination of glamorous star and nurturing parent. To Hollywood audiences, it was proof that she could do it all: the career, the beauty, and the family. But as with so much of Joan's life, the truth was far more complicated. Unable to have biological children, Joan turned to adoption, bringing home Christina, and later Christopher, Kathy, and Cindy. On the surface, it looked like a fairy tale, a movie star who opened her heart and her home to children in need. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was very different. Christina, the eldest, would later claim that Joan's obsession with control extended into every part of their lives. According to Christina, nothing was ever good enough. Every detail, from table manners to posture to even how clothes were hung in the closet, was subject to Joan's relentless standards. Mistakes, she alleged, were met not with correction but with punishment. Rumors of Joan's harsh discipline circulated even before Christina spoke out publicly. Neighbors and insiders whispered that Joan was stricter than most mothers of her time, sometimes to the point of cruelty. Others defended her, saying she was simply a perfectionist who expected the best. But in Hollywood, where image was everything, Joan made sure her private world stayed hidden. For decades, the glossy photographs of happy family life masked whatever turmoil may have been unfolding inside the house. Christina would later describe an environment of fear, where Joan's temper could be unpredictable and explosive. She claimed her mother's obsession with control went beyond discipline, turning into humiliation and emotional abuse. Stories of midnight confrontations, of Joan flying into rages over small infractions, painted a portrait far removed from the smiling woman in fan magazines. Yet during those years, Joan's public image never faltered. She continued to project the role of doting mother, attending PTA meetings, writing notes to teachers, and maintaining the illusion that her home life was as perfect as her Hollywood career. Other accounts complicate the picture further. Joan's twins, Kathy and Cindy, often defended their mother, insisting they never experienced the kind of treatment Christina described. Supporters argued that Christina exaggerated her claims, motivated by bitterness or resentment toward a demanding parent. Detractors pointed out that Joan carefully maintained control over her younger children's lives, even after they became adults, raising questions about how much of the truth was hidden. By the time Joan's health began to decline, her relationship with Christina was fractured beyond repair. What had once looked like the star's greatest achievement, reinventing herself not only as an actress but as a loving mother, was now the center of her most enduring scandal. And when Joan passed away, Christina finally revealed to the world what she claimed had really happened inside their home. It was a revelation that would forever change how people remembered Joan Crawford. When Joan Crawford died in 1977, her public image was still intact. Hollywood mourned her as an icon of the silver screen, a woman who had risen from poverty to become an Academy Award-winning actress. But the illusion did not last long. Just a year later, Christina Crawford shattered everything with the release of her memoir, Mommie Dearest. What was supposed to be a tribute turned into one of the most explosive exposes in Hollywood history. In its pages, Christina painted a chilling portrait of Joan, not as the glamorous star the world admired, but as a controlling, violent, and abusive mother. The book was a bombshell. Christina claimed that Joan's obsession with control ruled every part of their lives, describing terrifying incidents where she was allegedly beaten, belittled, and emotionally destroyed by the very woman who raised her. The most infamous story, Joan flying into a rage over wire hangers, screaming and attacking Christina, became etched into pop culture. Readers were horrified. The woman they had once idolized was now being described as a tyrant who terrorized her children behind closed doors. The fallout was immediate. Supporters of Christina praised her bravery, insisting the book exposed the darker side of Hollywood's carefully maintained illusions. Critics, however, accused her of exaggeration, bitterness, or even outright fabrication. Joan's defenders pointed to her other children, who denied experiencing the same kind of abuse. The debate grew louder when the book was adapted into the 1981 film Mommie Dearest, starring Faye Dunaway, in an unforgettable and some say career-damaging performance. The movie turned Joan into a pop culture villain, cementing the image of her as a deranged and abusive mother. But even as audiences gasped at the shocking depictions, many wondered if the truth was really that simple. Was Christina revealing the reality of life inside the Crawford household, or was she rewriting history to settle personal scores? Hollywood insiders whispered that Joan had enemies who wanted her name tarnished, while others pointed out that Joan herself had been known for her cruelty and manipulation. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in the middle, but the damage to Joan's reputation was done. Mommie Dearest transformed her legacy forever. For younger generations, Joan Crawford was no longer remembered primarily for Mildred Pierce or Grand Hotel. She was remembered for wire hangers, cold rage, and scenes of horrifying abuse. Even today, the mention of Joan's name often brings up the same question: was Christina's story true? Or did the world turn too quickly against a woman who could no longer defend herself? What no one can deny is the impact. Joan had fought her entire life to control her image, to be remembered as a legend, and in the end, one book and one movie destroyed it all. And yet, the scandal did not just reveal Joan's darker side. It exposed the fragility of Hollywood itself, a place where even the most carefully crafted illusions can come crashing down overnight. By the 1960s, Joan Crawford was facing the one enemy she could not outwork or outmaneuver: time. Hollywood was changing, and the roles that once came easily to her were slipping away. The glamorous leading lady she had embodied for decades was no longer in demand. Younger actresses like Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, and Audrey Hepburn dominated the screen, and Joan found herself cast aside by the very industry she had helped define. Joan refused to fade quietly. When MGM dropped her contract, she reinvented herself yet again, taking bold risks in roles others would have turned down. Her performance in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane brought her back into the spotlight, but it also reignited her feud with co-star Bette Davis. The film's success proved that Joan could still captivate audiences, but it was also a reminder that her days as a top-billed star were numbered. Off-screen, Joan's decline was just as painful. She became increasingly reclusive, turning to alcohol as her health and confidence deteriorated. Friends noted how paranoid she became about her image, avoiding cameras when she no longer felt beautiful and carefully limiting her public appearances. Her once glamorous social calendar disappeared, and she withdrew from the Hollywood parties where she had once been the center of attention. Joan Crawford's death did not settle the debate about who she truly was. It only made it louder. On one hand, she remains one of Hollywood's greatest legends, an actress who won an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce and starred in classics like Grand Hotel, Humoresque, and Possessed. She was a trailblazer who reinvented herself across 4 decades, from silent films to talkies, from flapper roles to melodramas, and finally to psychological thrillers. Few actors in history have managed to stay relevant as long as she did. But the other side of her legacy is darker, and it refuses to disappear. For many, the name Joan Crawford is forever tied to Mommie Dearest, with its infamous wire hanger scene and chilling depiction of abuse. Christina's memoir and the subsequent film did not just tarnish Joan's reputation, they replaced it. To an entire generation, Joan was not remembered as the Oscar-winning actress, but as the monstrous mother who ruled her home with cruelty. What makes Joan Crawford's legacy so haunting is the way it blends triumph and tragedy. She conquered an industry designed to discard women, yet ended up remembered for the darkest accusations imaginable. Her films remain classics, but her name still sparks debate, curiosity, and even fear. Was she a star destroyed by Hollywood's cruelty, or a mother exposed by her own children? Was she misunderstood, or was Mommie Dearest the truest glimpse behind the curtain? Decades after her death, Joan Crawford remains a mystery, and perhaps that is why people cannot stop talking about her. She was not just another Hollywood actress. She was a symbol of ambition, reinvention, and controversy. Whether seen as a legend or a villain, Joan's story refuses to fade, and in a strange way, that may have been her greatest achievement of all, ensuring that her name, for better or worse, would never be forgotten. So the question is left to us. When you hear the name Joan Crawford, do you see the Hollywood icon or the figure of Mommie Dearest?